Welcome back. It is week 9 running back tier list where we go through everything you guys need to set your fantasy football lineups at the running back positions, bye weeks, injuries, all the stuff usage-wise that you need to know for the running back position. I had a couple Don Julios and soda last night for Halloween, so I might be a little hazy throughout this, and I kind of look like death right now, but we're going to power through in today's video. Let's start with the running backs that are on bye this week. We do have Jordan Mason out on bye, Christian McCaffrey, of course, as well, potentially making his season debut after the bye against the Buccaneers next week, and then Najee Harris and Jalen Warren also out on bye this week. But the other 30 teams are in action. We do still have a lot of injuries to talk about, though, at the running back position this week, starting with Travis Etienne, who is a game-time decision heading into Sunday's game against Philadelphia, dealing with that hamstring injury that has kept him out the past 2 weeks. He is probably going to come back. I think there's optimism that he will make his return from that injury, but him and Tank Bigsby are both kind of banged up right now, so not a great situation for Jacksonville. Brian Thomas Jr., also a game-time decision. Christian Kirk, of course, out with the collarbone injury for the rest of the season. Tony Pollard also did not practice all week with a foot injury, and he is questionable to play Sunday, also listed as a game-time decision as well. And Tajay Spears is out for that game. So going to be an interesting dynamic in the backfield for Tennessee. If you're really desperate at running back, I suppose you could pick up Julius Chestnut, but I do think that Tony Pollard will end up playing in this game. It is worth noting, though, that he has been like a workhorse, like 80% opportunity share guy for the last couple of weeks that Tajay Spears has been out. So if he is out and injured, it could open up the door for Chestnut to potentially be a big-time waiver addition next week. Zach Moss also listed as doubtful with a neck injury, which is new. It actually popped up on Friday's injury report. He did not practice, and he is doubtful for Sunday's game against the Raiders. Very surprising addition to the injury report. It's going to be wheels up for Chase Brown this week. Jonathan Brooks listed out for this game, even though he practiced in full all week. We really thought he was going to make his debut for the Carolina Panthers, the rookie running back they drafted in the second round. It looks like his debut game will be in week 10 in Germany, which is against the New York Giants, and then they go into a bye week after that. So it kind of makes sense. They're being patient with him, get his feet wet in one game, and then come back after the bye, hopefully a little bit more healthy. Minor running back notes, like I said, Tajay Spears is out for the Titans, so if Pollard plays, he's going to get another big workload. Kendre Miller is also out for the New Orleans Saints, and Jamal Williams is also doubtful, so it looks like it's going to be a heavy dose of Alvin Kamara, and I also think Taysom Hill might get worked in to the backfield a little bit if you guys need a tight end start. I think Taysom Hill is a pretty decent one. Zamir White is listed as questionable with a quad injury. He was limited practice Wednesday, downgraded to did not practice on Thursday, and then upgraded again to full practice on Friday. So we'll monitor his status. Of course, Alexander Madison expects to be a workhorse regardless, but if Zamir White is out, a really big workhorse. Jerome Ford, been out for a couple of games with a hamstring injury. He is coming back. This will be the first time that we've seen both him and Nick Chubb on the field together, so we'll have to monitor the usage there. And then Keaton Mitchell making his season debut this week. He's been a full practice all week, coming off of a torn ACL that he suffered last January, listed as questionable, but I think he is expected to play in this one. So again, a lot of moving parts at running back this week, but we'll break that all down in the tier list. Let's start with the locked-in running back starts, 1 to 12 in my running back rankings. I just kind of breeze through these guys. Talk about who has good matchups, bad matchups, high-scoring game environments, and then I'll highlight any usage trends that we need to talk about. Some of the elite running backs this week in good matchups. We have Alvin Kamara going up against the dead last-ranked Carolina Panthers, and as I just mentioned, Kendre Miller and Jamal Williams expected to be out for that game, so an absolute eruption spot for Alvin Kamara this week. Bijan Robinson against the Dallas Cowboys. They're a bottom 5 defense against fantasy running backs. Saquon against Jacksonville. Devon Achane against the Buffalo Bills. Kenneth Walker against the Los Angeles Rams. Aaron Jones against the Indianapolis Colts. Joe Mixon against the Jets, which we already saw on Thursday night. He had a pretty good game there. So those guys all pretty well set up to have good performances that are top 12 running backs. Elite running backs that are in high-scoring games. You have Bijan Robinson in that Dallas Cowboys game. That is a 52-point over-under, the highest on the slate, so he's in a good spot there. James Cook, Devon Achane, same game there, 49.5-point over-under. Jahmyr Gibbs versus the Green Bay Packers, that's a 48.5-point over-under. Kyron Williams and Kenneth Walker, same game there, 48.5-point over-under. Aaron Jones on Sunday Night Football, 46.5-point over-under. Derrick Henry against the Broncos, 45.5. And then Saquon versus the Jaguars, 45.5 as well, although the Ravens and the Eagles in those respective games, implied for most of those points, according to Vegas. Elite running backs that are in bad matchups, so guys that could potentially underperform just given the matchup. We already saw this on Thursday Night Football with Breece Hall. The Houston Texans are first against fantasy running backs, so don't panic about Breece Hall. I know he hasn't been great in the last 2 games, but he is going to be better going forward. He has one of the best schedules of any running back, and he is easily one of the best buy lows right now if people are panicking. I saw some Yahoo on Twitter call him like an RB2 rest of season. Completely, absolutely asinine because he has such a great schedule, so go buy low on him. Jahmyr Gibbs versus the Packers, also not a great matchup. James Cook versus the Dolphins, not a great matchup. And Kyron versus the Seahawks, not a great matchup. But generally speaking, my top 12, all in pretty good spots this week. 2 guys I want to highlight from the top 12, Alvin Kamara. Like I said, both Kendre and Jamal Williams out. Kamara against the 32nd ranked Panthers defense. This will be an absolute movie. And Alvin Kamara, prior to the last couple of weeks, has actually seen his workload decrease a little bit because of Kendre Miller being healthy, because of Jamal Williams being healthy. He hasn't exceeded a 60% snap share in the last 2 games. But as you can see earlier in the year, when Kendre Miller was out and Jamal Williams wasn't really involved, we saw games of 87% of the snaps, so on and so forth. So I think we're going to get a huge, huge game out of Alvin Kamara this week. If you guys need a big DFS play, I think he's probably one of the best. Aaron Jones, his workload has spiked the last week as well to a career high 92% of the snaps for the Vikings. If he keeps getting a workload like this, I mean, one of 2 things is going to happen. He's either going to be an RB1 rest of season or a top 5 running back potentially, or he's going to get hurt, which is also possible for a guy like Aaron Jones. But like I said, 23rd ranked Colts defense this week could be in for a huge game. Those 2 veteran running backs had usage spikes, or I guess Kamara doesn't have one yet, but an imminent usage spike coming, so I figured I would highlight those. But let's get into the high-end RB2s tier, starting with Jonathan Taylor, who's not usually in this range, but because we have such good matchups for a lot of these players, and he doesn't really have a great matchup, finds himself outside of the top 12. Jonathan Taylor versus the Minnesota Vikings this week, who are 4th against fantasy running backs. He's an elite player. Of course, we know this about Jonathan Taylor. Now, Joe Flacco starting at quarterback for the Indianapolis Colts for the foreseeable future. So despite the tough matchup for Jonathan Taylor, it is worth pointing out that the Vikings defense has regressed a little bit against the run. Jahmyr Gibbs went for over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns 2 weeks ago against them. Kyron Williams going over 100 yards and a touchdown last Thursday night against the Vikings. So their defense is wavering a little bit against the run. Jonathan Taylor, surprisingly, and Joe Flacco haven't played a whole lot together so far this year. Their injuries and starting time didn't really overlap much. The only game that he played, Jonathan Taylor with Flacco starting, was against the Steelers. And against the Steelers, he went for over 100 yards, had a touchdown, also had a season-high 4 targets in that game. So very good chance that Jonathan Taylor is still really good in this one, even despite the tough matchup. I think he is actually one of my favorite plays this week as far as, like, if you're betting the game or, playing a showdown DFS on Sunday Night Football. I think he is definitely an interesting one there. Chase Brown is my RB14 this week. And yes, Chase Brown that high, abso-freaking-lutely, dude. No Zach Moss against the Las Vegas Raiders defense. This is an absolute eruption, breakout game potential for Chase Brown. The Raiders are so bad against the run. The last 4 running backs that have played the Raiders, this is their stat lines: over 100 yards from scrimmage and or scored a touchdown for Kyron Williams, Najee Harris, Javonte Williams, and Kareem Hunt the last 4 games. Very, very good spot for Chase Brown this week. And you can see his workload was already increasing prior to this happening. He had led the team in carries for like 5 or 6 straight games. And also, too, he was over a 60% snap share back in week 6 for the first time without Zach Moss on the field. He is going to have a great breakout game, and I actually like him to find the end zone in this one, and we're going to be building out a pick'em entry throughout this video. So Chase Brown finding the end zone is the first one that we're going to talk about here. And of course, Underdog Fantasy, promo code FSE if you want to tail it. DeAndre Swift is my RB15 for the week, going up against the Arizona Cardinals. He's actually been an RB1 in 4 straight games, going back before the bye as well. He's definitely played some cupcake defenses, DeAndre Swift. I mean, they played like the Panthers and the Jaguars and a bunch of shit teams, but the Commanders had been hot on defense prior to last week, and Swift still ended up getting there in that matchup. This week, he's got another cupcake going up against Arizona, who saw both Devon Achane and Raheem Mostert post top 12 weeks just a week ago. Caleb Williams probably going to have a better game this week, not going up against the Commanders, who are, they've been a lot better on defense, like I said. So I do think that DeAndre Swift and the Bears as a whole should be able to get healthy in terms of putting up points and having a good performance in this game. So I like him. I like DJ Moore. I like, Keenan Allen, any other guy on the Bears that you want to start this week, I think are good plays. Running back 16 for me in my rankings, Josh Jacobs against the Detroit Lions. 4 straight top 20 performances, 2 in a row now, over 20 PPR points. If you bought low on Josh Jacobs a couple weeks back when we talked about it when Jordan Love was coming back, definitely has paid off for you so far. This is the game of the week. I mean, these two teams are fighting for the top of the best division in football. I have no doubt in my mind Jordan Love's going to play. It's already been reported that he's expected to play. The bye is next week for Josh Jacobs, and he can rest at that point in time, and so can Jordan Love. They are going to throw everything they possibly can at the Detroit Lions. Since Aiden Hutchinson's injury as well, the Lions defense has been a lot worse than it was to start the year. They have allowed an average of 400 total yards of offense the last 2 games. Both Aaron Jones and Tony Pollard went over 100 total yards from scrimmage as running backs the last 2 weeks too, because they were a really good run defense to start the year. Aiden Hutchinson goes down. The anchor of their defensive line has not been there, and they have not been good against the run. Like I said, Aaron Jones, Tony Pollard both had games the last 2 weeks, so I expect Josh Jacobs to be productive in this one. Running back 17 for me is David Montgomery, who has the 14th ranked Green Bay Packers defense to go up against. High scoring game potential. Again, same game environment we were just talking about. David Montgomery is always a threat to score a rushing touchdown, punch one in the red zone, maybe punch 2 in the red zone. The Packers have only allowed 5 rushing touchdowns to running backs all year in 8 games. So it is possible that the Lions need to throw in the red zone or whatever, but it's not a great matchup for the receivers on the outside. So I expect the running backs and Sam Laporta to do a whole lot of the heavy lifting for the Lions in this game. Jahmyr Gibbs has been elite 20-plus point per game guy the last 2 weeks. Maybe it's time for David Montgomery to kind of correct that usage a little bit, because I don't want to go out on a limb and say that like Jahmyr Gibbs is the workhorse now, or when David Montgomery has a couple good games in a row, he's the workhorse now. This backfield is always going to be back and forth, better and best ball. You want the spike weeks, but you're going to see one of them disappoint, usually 1 week, and then sometimes there's going to be games where they both get there. But we saw 2 Gibbs weeks in a row. I think Montgomery's week could be coming this week. Brian Robinson is my RB18, closing out this high-end RB2s tier, going up against the New York Giants. I think he's a good buy low right now as well. I talked about James Cook as a good buy low on the running back tier list video last week, and of course I talked about Devon Achane for the last couple weeks, and those both materialized for sure. The usage for Brian Robinson is still working his way back since he suffered the knee injury back in week 4. He's kind of been really banged up since, and he was a limited participant all week this week with a hamstring injury and is listed questionable to play. So he's kind of been dealing with some injuries, but it's caused him to not be nearly as good as he was at the beginning of the season. And I still think down the stretch, he could be an absolute league winner because Jaden Daniels is a rookie quarterback. He's only getting better and better as the season goes along. This game should be a win for the Commanders. They're 4-point favorites per Vegas right now. They're implied for nearly 24 points. So if Brian Robinson is healthy, and again, that's kind of a big if right now, I believe he's like a game time decision or listed as questionable. I do believe he is going to have a pretty good game in this one. Moving into the next tier of running backs, we have the low end RB2s. And to be honest, this week, there's not a huge separation between the guys that I just talked about in the high end RB2s tier outside of like Jonathan Taylor and maybe the first couple of guys versus the rest of these guys in the low end RB2s tier. There's a lot of really good plays at running back in week number 9, starting with Chuba Hubbard, who I have at RB19 this week against the New Orleans Saints, who are 22nd against fantasy running backs. We've seen Javonte Williams take advantage of them. We saw the Buccaneers running backs, Sean Tucker and Bucky Irving 3 weeks ago, take advantage of them. Chuba Hubbard doesn't have Jonathan Brooks active yet. We thought that they were going to activate him this week, but they're being really patient. Chuba Hubbard hasn't been elite the last couple of games because, going back to like weeks 3 to 6, he was absolutely awesome, a top 16 running back in every single one of those games. All the way back in week 1, when the Saints and Panthers played for the first time, Derek Carr was the starting quarterback, and the Saints looked like this unstoppable offense, and they beat the daylights out of the Carolina Panthers when Bryce Young was starting. The Panthers, though, have gotten a lot better since then. Whether it's Bryce Young or Andy Dalton at quarterback, I don't really think it's a huge difference at this point in time. And I think they're doing the right thing. They jettisoned away their, veteran stopgap receiver like Deontay Johnson. They trade him to the Ravens. And now you have the first overall pick actually starting games, which is what they should have been doing the whole time. I get that Andy Dalton was a little spark plug for them, but you got to see what you have in Bryce Young. And you also have all these young receivers, Xavier Legette, Jalen Coker, who of course was like my dude during the draft cycle. Absolutely love to see him getting some national attention. And the fact that he's just going to start as an undrafted free agent rookie is just super, super impressive. and then Jonathan Mingo, who they drafted in the second round. You got to see what you have in these young players. And Bryce Young throwing to Xavier Legette, Jalen Coker, and Jonathan Mingo is precisely what should happen for the next 10 games, because you need to see who can play and who can't play. If Legette can play and Bryce Young can play, great. You got a little duo next for the next couple of years to work together. If Coker can play, he's a nice number 2 receiver for you the next couple of years. We'll have to see what develops here, but I do think they're doing the right thing right now. And speaking of Chuba Hubbard, I think the offense is going to look a lot better this week than it did back in week 1 when they last played the Saints. The Saints also, without their top 2 corners, Marshawn Lattimore and their slot corner as well. So I think they're going to be able to move the ball against this New Orleans Saints team. And I like Chuba Hubbard to go higher than 66.5 total rushing yards. That will be the second part of our pick'em entry. And the third part we'll talk about right now, Tyrone Tracy versus the Washington Commanders. They are 11th against fantasy running backs. Tracy has already cleared the concussion protocol, which is a little wild because they played on Monday Night Football. He's already cleared the protocol. Usually you would expect a guy on a short week to probably not clear the protocol and miss a game. I don't know what's happened here. Maybe it was just a really minor concussion. Either way, he's fully taken over this backfield. He is the guy. The Vince Carter meme, it's over. It's done. Like, as a Raptors fan, I love that meme, but like it's done. Like, this is Tracy's backfield now, and the Washington Commanders, again, they've tightened up a little bit on defense, but they allowed DeAndre Swift to have a big game last week. I expect the Giants to be playing from behind, so I think Tyrone Tracy is a good bet to catch a couple passes in this one, which is why I like him to go higher than 2.5 receptions, which is his pick'em right now on Underdog Fantasy. He's been a 3+ target per game guy the last 3 in a row. So that concludes our pick'em entry. If you guys do want to tail this, we just doing a 3 pick'em for 6XR cash here. If you want to tail it, you can head down to the link in the pinned comment using promo code FSE when you sign up on Underdog Fantasy. You can get up to $1,000 in bonus cash. You'll also get this Jalen Hurts free square that you can add in and make this entry a 10x if it hits. And then again, you also get our weekly start sit rankings for free. When you sign up on Underdog, use code FSE, make a $10 or more deposit, and make a play on the site, you will be emailed our Start Sit Rankings manifesto for free into your email inbox within 24 hours. So if that interests you, link down below in the pinned comment for that. But continuing on, we have RB21 in my rankings. That is J.K. Dobbins of the Los Angeles Chargers going up against the Cleveland Browns this week, who ranked 12th against fantasy running backs. Career high 81% of the snaps last week, so we can start there for J.K. Dobbins. That is really, really bullish news for him to just be getting workload after workload after workload. He's not wearing down. He's still playing at a high level. He's been good like kind of every other week. He's also been kind of like a better in best ball guy as far as when his spike weeks are coming. It's a tough matchup versus Cleveland this week, but the workload is so good right now. 23 opportunities on average the last 3 games. That's how much J.K. Dobbins is being used right now, including 7 targets last week. The reason I was so in on J.K. Dobbins, he was literally my number 1 sleeper entering the year, is because I knew this offense was going to want to run the ball, and Dobbins was the best player that they had to do that job. This is a sneaky shootout spot, in my opinion, too. I know the over-under is only 42.5, but I am absolutely hammering the over in this game because I think that the Chargers and Browns are both offenses that are capable of shooting out, and we've actually seen this in years past, and I get, Herbert has Jim Harbaugh kind of holding him back now, but the Browns want to throw. The Browns force you to play up-tempo against them because they want to throw so much, and we know Jameis Winston's going to drop back and try and sling it. So I absolutely love the over in this game. I'm starting players from this game: McConkey, J.K. Dobbins, Nick Chubb, Cedric Tillman, whoever you want to start from this game, I think you can, because I do think this game is going way over 42.5, and J.K. Dobbins definitely a sneaky good play as a result of that. RB22 for me in my rankings is Kareem Hunt. Kareem Hunt is in a spot where the Buccaneers are just so easy to pass the ball against that you don't run it against them. Like, when you look at the splits between how often teams are running versus passing against Tampa Bay, it's up there with the highest in the league of pass attempt percentage. And sometimes offenses that are not pass heavy will come in and throw the ball like crazy against Tampa Bay because it just does not make sense to run it into the teeth of defense against Vita Vea and company when you can drop back and average 10 yards per pass attempt every time you drop back and pass the ball. Kareem Hunt obviously is going to be a beneficiary if Kareem Hunt and the Kansas City Chiefs are moving the ball at will, getting into the red zone. Kareem Hunt can score some touchdowns, and he has been over 10 PPR points in every single game that he's been the starter for Kansas City. But I definitely think that efficiency-wise, he might have a down game, similar to what we saw from him last week. Going up against the Raiders, he didn't really have that great efficiency, but he did find the end zone and have a pretty good week as a result of that 13.3 PPR points. I could see something similar for Kareem Hunt this week. He was RB22 last week. I have him ranked RB22 yet again. Keep an eye on Isaiah Pacheco. His slated timeline when he went down was 6 to 8 weeks. It's been 7 since that time, but Andy Reid hinted that his practice window is probably not going to get activated this week or maybe even next week. So it looks like, week 10, week 11, week 12 is when we can maybe expect Isaiah Pacheco back. Also, I mean, Kansas City 7-0. Kareem Hunt's doing a fine job. There's absolutely no reason to rush Isaiah Pacheco back from their perspective because they're going for 3 straight Super Bowls. They don't really care that Isaiah Pacheco fantasy managers want him back. So something to monitor on Kareem Hunt. You'll probably get another couple games out of him if you're a Kareem Hunt manager. Moving on to Tony Pollard here versus the New England Patriots. He missed practice all week with a foot injury, like I said. Game time decision. Tajay Spears already out. The Patriots-Titans game is just going to be a slugfest, a 38-point over-under. But the thing that I do like for Tony Pollard is that Will Levis is coming back. And I know Will Levis isn't good, really, at all. But Will Levis does do one thing for Tony Pollard, which is stretch the defense vertically. And we saw 4 of his best 5 games this season come with Will Levis at quarterback. And I think the reason for that is because when you're playing against Mason Rudolph, they all just know that Tony Pollard's getting the ball and they're going to run the ball like crazy. And you can just stop the run, no problem. And I think Will Levis allows them to drop back and pass a lot more, which is good for Calvin Ridley. And it's good for Tony Pollard, but health is the key for this week for Pollard because he is coming in pretty banged up with that foot injury. RB24 in my rankings is James Conner going up against the Chicago Bears. Not a good matchup, 8th against fantasy running backs. Workhorse usage, though, for James Conner. I would love to rank him higher, but honestly, the landscape of running backs is such that being a workhorse no longer guarantees you high-end RB2 status. It's really wild how many workhorse running backs we've seen this year. Usually, a guy like this, like I said, would be a top 15, top 18 running back on any given week, no matter what his matchup looks like. But the number of running backs that have seen over a 65% opportunity share in 2024 is up from the previous 2 years. A whopping 20 running backs are over a 65% opportunity share of their backfields this season, and 13 running backs are over 70%. So we're getting guys being workhorse running backs this year. Just last year, we only had 15. The year before, we only had 14. So bell cows are back, and James Conner is one of them. So he is definitely a guy that you can fire out there pretty much every given week as an RB2 because he has the workload. Moving into the flex plays here, we're going to kick things off with Bucky Irving, who is my RB25, going up against the 3rd-ranked Kansas City Chiefs defense against the run. They've been very, very good against fantasy running backs, and Bucky Irving and the Bucs are going to have a really challenging uphill battle on Monday Night Football. Bucky has been a top 18 running back, though, in 3 straight games, even despite Rachaad White being on the field the last 2 games and being a top 15 running back himself in 2 straight games. The Bucs are relying on their run game right now. They have one more game after Kansas City where Mike Evans will be out. They have the bye week in week 11. Of course, it would be nice if they didn't have to play Kansas City and San Francisco the next 2 weeks, but I digress as a Buccaneers fan. It would have been nice if they threw us a Carolina Panthers game in here while Mike Evans is out. It's a brutal matchup, like I said, but Bucky Irving is getting the work. He looks fantastic every time he gets the ball. I wish he gets the ball. I wish he would get the ball more as a Buccaneers fan. It's a brutal matchup, like I said, but the receiving usage and the fact that they need to rely on the run game should be able to buoy both of these guys, Rachaad White included. I'm not going to talk about him. He's RB28 for me, but basically it's just the same argument. They're getting like a 50-50 split right now, and both of them have a tough matchup, but they're both going to get receiving work, so it definitely works in their favor. Alexander Mattison, my RB26 this week, versus the Cincinnati Bengals. They're 13th against the run. Madison has low-key been one of the biggest workhorses in the NFL over the last 4 games. Zamir White is listed as questionable, as I talked about in the injury segment. Limited practice, did not practice, full practice the last 3 days. Listed as questionable with a quad injury. Alexander Mattison has been over 18 opportunities in every game the last 4 weeks, and he's had at least 3 targets in every game over the last 4 weeks as well. It's a tough matchup, but Alexander Mattison is just getting too good of a workload at this point in time, especially if Zamir White is going to be out. The last time he missed a game, Alexander Mattison was over 17 PPR points in week 6. So I think Mattison is a great play this week as well. Running back 27 for me is Ramondre Stevenson, who is going up against the Tennessee Titans. Again, not a very good game environment, 24th ranked against fantasy running backs. I would say Ramondre Stevenson has been like better in best ball because in managed leagues, he's been a little bit of a headache as far as when he's going to get the work, when he's not going to get the work. A lot of it stems back from his injury in week 4, where he ended up missing week 6 with that injury, and then he was also kind of like a game time decision in London in week 7, so we didn't really get to see his full workload in those games. And then in week 8, he comes out and he has 21.5 PPR points. We don't know for sure if Drake May is going to start for the New England Patriots, but they sound kind of optimistic on Drake May, so keep an eye on that. And again, if it's Drake May versus Will Levis, that's at a lot more of a compelling game environment than if it was Mason Rudolph and Jacoby Brissett, which would be just like the most sexless game environment ever. But regardless, I think Ramondre Stevenson is a good start this week. RB28 for me is Rachaad White, who I already kind of broke down with the Bucky Irving case. Running back 29 for me is Nick Chubb, who I have going up against the Chargers here this week. They're a top 5 run defense, so that's not good. Great play this week, I still think, because like I said, I think the game is going to go over their total. I do think, though, that Jerome Ford could throw a wrench into Nick Chubb's usage, because Jerome Ford and Nick Chubb have not played a game together, like I said. Nick Chubb was ramped up to a full workload last week. Efficiency, tough matchup, all going to be concerns for him. But like I said, the workload is the thing that I'm most concerned about for Nick Chubb, because Jerome Ford, to me, is the only guy that was going to threaten his workload as far as who's in the Browns' backfield now. But hopefully, Nick Chubb is still a workhorse in this game, or still getting his workload despite Jerome Ford returning from injury. RB30 for me is Rico Dowdle. Rico was surprised inactive on Sunday Night Football with an illness last week. Surprisingly, the corpse of Ezekiel Elliott and Dalvin Cook couldn't do anything while he was out, and it's 2024. We all should have seen that coming. But Rico Dowdle might actually be a sneaky buy low right now, because he had bad usage in Week 6. Week 7 was the bye for the Cowboys. Week 8, he's out with a surprise illness. I think that if anybody's desperate at running back right now, like, for example, me in the Flock League, I have Alexander Madison and Devon Achane, and then, like, all, like, handcuffs and upside swings. If I was in a situation like next week, for example, Madison is on bye, and I wanted to go buy low on Rico Dowdle right now, I could definitely use a guy like Madison, or maybe use somebody off of the waiver wire at wide receiver or whatever. You might be able to go and get Rico Dowdle for very, very cheap right now, and I think he actually might have a decent second half of the season. Getting into the final tier of running backs, we have the deep league flex plays. I'll just rattle through these really fast. Javonte Williams versus the Ravens. They're a top 15 run defense. Workload is consistent. Javonte Williams is not. I mean, the only thing that's been consistent about him is the fact that he gets like 60% of the snaps every week. The Broncos are starting to play better, which is great, but the Ravens are going to be a real test for them. And unlike the Mickey Mouse schedule they've played the last 3 to 4 games, Baltimore might get up big in this one, or I don't know, maybe the Broncos will keep it close, but regardless, Javonte Williams, not a great play given the matchup and the game environment. Running back 32 for me is Tank Bigsby against the Philadelphia Eagles. ETN and Bigsby are both banged up right now. We don't have Christian Kirk. Brian Thomas is a game-time decision. Not a good situation for either Jacksonville running back at this point in time. If ETN gets ruled out, I would probably move Tank Bigsby into back-end RB2 territory, very similar to where I have like Rachaad White and stuff. But for now, I'm kind of expecting both of these guys to play hobbled in a tough matchup against the Philadelphia run defense that you would rather pass against than run the ball. So not a great situation for Tank Bigsby or ETN, who would be like right in this range as well. Raheem Mostert versus the Buffalo Bills. Again, he got back to a nice little workload last week, found the end zone. It's a high-scoring game. He makes sense as a good start, 47% of the snaps in week number 8. Austin Eckler versus the Giants. Again, Brian Robinson coming into the game banged up. I think he'll end up playing, but Eckler probably sees a little bit of a bump as a result of that. And again, it's a run-heavy game environment, so they might use both of these guys. And then the last two guys that I want to talk about, Tyler Algier, Zach Charbonnet, they're just high-leverage handcuffs and guys that get like 5 to 15 touches depending on the game script. So if you wanted to throw them in because you're really desperate at running back, I think you could, but they're probably not ideal. I would say this tier kind of ends at like RB33 with Raheem Mostert of guys that I would actually feel comfortable putting in my lineup. The rest of these guys are kind of just desperation plays. And like I said, if ETN ends up playing, he would probably be right in this range, but I didn't rank him just because I think it's a little bit up in the air. Plus, he's coming off of a major injury. The hamstring injury has kept him out for a couple games, so I don't really feel great about him. But this is the end of the video. If I helped you set your lineup, again, anybody that I told you to start, if I had someone RB20 and you have a guy who's RB25, I would start RB20 over RB25. I feel like I shouldn't have to say that, but that is how my weekly rankings are set up. So if I have a guy RB20 and RB25 is the guy you're deciding between, go with the guy who is RB20. Leave a like if I helped you set your lineup. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new around here. If you want to tail our pick'em entry, Tracy, Chuba Hubbard, Chase Brown, hit it down below in the description and in the pinned comment. Promo code FSE over on Underdog Fantasy gets you up to $1,000 in bonus cash. The Jalen Hurts free square, our weekly start sit rankings for free after you make your first deposit and play on the site. And you can tail this entry. Win up to 6x your money if it hits. Win up to 10x if you're a new customer over on Underdog. Check out the site, flockfantasy.com, for all my rest of season rankings, all of my weekly rankings, all of our dynasty rankings, and a ton of other bonus content from me and the other creators in the Flock League. Follow our Flock League if you guys aren't already doing so. That is linked down below in the description. You get to see kind of like a reality TV show version of fantasy football between me and Danny and the rest of the creators on the site. All of that is linked down below in the description. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.